Have you ever felt like you're wearing a mask so heavy that you've forgotten the face underneath? Like every word you speak, every gesture you make, is carefully calculated to earn approval from people who might not even notice when you're gone? You smile when you want to scream. You say yes when every fiber of your being whispers no. And in the quiet moments, when you're finally alone, you feel empty. Not sad, not angry, just profoundly, devastatingly empty. This isn't weakness. This is the silent tragedy of a soul that has traded its authenticity for acceptance. And today we're going to talk about something that might change everything for you. Because Carl Rogers, one of the most revolutionary psychologists of our time, discovered something about human nature that explains why you feel this way and, more importantly, how to break free. Rogers spent decades studying the human psyche, sitting with thousands of people in their darkest moments. And what he found wasn't in textbooks or theories. It was in the trembling voice of a woman who couldn't say no to her family, in the tears of a man who had built his entire life around what others expected, in the silence of children who learned that love comes with conditions. What Rogers discovered is that we're all born with something he called the actualizing tendency. It's like a seed within you that knows exactly what it needs to grow into a magnificent tree. But here's where it gets painful. From the moment we're old enough to understand approval and rejection, we start to betray this inner wisdom. We learn that love has a price, and that price is our authentic self. Think about it. When you were a child, you didn't calculate your worth based on how useful you were to others. You didn't measure your value by how much you could give. You simply were. You laughed when something was funny, cried when you were hurt, said no when you didn't want something. But then something happened. Maybe it was a parent who only smiled when you were good, a teacher who only praised perfection, friends who only stayed when you entertained them. And slowly, invisibly, you learned the most destructive lesson of your life, that you are only worthy of love when you please others. Rogers called this conditional positive regard, and it's the invisible prison that keeps millions of people trapped in lives that don't belong to them. When love becomes conditional, when acceptance has requirements, when belonging demands performance, something dies inside us. That spontaneous, authentic self that knew exactly who it was and what it wanted gets buried under layers of should be, must be, have to be. But here's what most people don't understand. The problem isn't that you're broken. The problem isn't that you're weak. The problem is that you've been magnificent at adapting to a toxic system. You've become a master at reading rooms, anticipating needs, managing emotions that aren't yours. You've developed an almost supernatural ability to sense what others want and become it. This isn't pathology. This is genius. Misdirected genius, but genius nonetheless. Let me tell you something that might shake you. Every time you abandon yourself to please someone else, you're not actually helping them. You're enabling their inability to handle disappointment. You're reinforcing their belief that their comfort matters more than your truth. You're participating in a transaction where your soul is the currency, and the exchange rate is devastating. Rogers observed something profound in his therapy sessions. When people finally felt truly accepted, without conditions, without performance, without masks, something miraculous happened. They didn't become selfish monsters. They didn't turn cruel or indifferent. Instead, they became more genuinely caring, more authentically generous, more deeply connected to others. Because here's the paradox. The more you betray yourself to maintain relationships, the less real those relationships become. You cannot give what you don't have. And when you've given away your authenticity, your boundaries, your truth, what's left to offer? A hollow performance, a desperate dance, an exhausting charade that leaves everyone feeling empty. That anxiety you feel when you think about saying no. That guilt that floods you when you consider your own needs. That terror of disappointing others. These aren't signs of your compassion. These are the chains of your conditioning. They're the echoes of every time you learned that love was something to be earned, not something you inherently deserved. Rogers introduced a concept that changed everything: unconditional positive regard. But here's what most people miss. This isn't just about how others should treat you. This is about how you must learn to treat yourself. Because the person whose approval you need most, whose love you're desperately seeking, whose acceptance would change everything, is you. Think about the last time you pleased someone at your own expense. What did you gain? A moment of relief from anxiety, a temporary sense of being good enough. And what did it cost you? Another piece of your integrity, another moment of self-abandonment, another step away from who you really are. Every act of people-pleasing is actually an act of self-violence. You're not being kind. You're being cruel to the one person you're responsible for protecting, yourself. Rogers noticed that his clients who transformed most profoundly were the ones who learned something earth-shattering. They learned that their worth wasn't in their usefulness. Their value wasn't in their compliance. Their significance wasn't in their ability to make others comfortable. They learned that they were inherently, unconditionally valuable simply because they existed. Breaking free from people-pleasing isn't about becoming harsh or uncaring. It's not about building walls or developing indifference. It's about something far more radical. It's about trusting that your authentic self, with all its needs, boundaries, desires, and limitations, is not only acceptable, but necessary. The world doesn't need another performer. It doesn't need another person saying yes when they mean no. What the world desperately needs is you, the real you, the one you've been hiding because you learned it wasn't good enough. Rogers discovered that the people who were most genuinely helpful to others, who created the most positive change in the world, who formed the deepest relationships, weren't the ones who pleased everyone. They were the ones who had achieved what he called congruence. Their inner experience matched their outer expression. They said what they meant. They honored their feelings. They respected their limits. When you stop trying to please everyone, you finally become someone worth knowing. When you stop performing for love, you become capable of real intimacy. When you stop abandoning yourself for others' comfort, you become a safe haven for those who are also seeking authenticity. But the journey from people-pleasing to authenticity isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. You'll say no and feel guilty. You'll set a boundary and question yourself. You'll choose yourself and feel selfish. This is normal. This is the withdrawal from a lifetime of addiction to external validation. Rogers understood that change happens in an environment of acceptance, not judgment. So as you begin this journey, you need to become your own therapist, offering yourself the unconditional positive regard you've been seeking from others. When you fail, when you fall back into old patterns, when you please someone out of habit, you don't need criticism. You need compassion. You need the kind of acceptance that says, I see you trying, and that's enough. The people who truly love you don't want your performance. They don't want your sacrifice. They don't want a relationship with your mask. They want you. But as long as you keep showing up as who you think they want you to be, they never get the chance to love who you actually are. And those who are upset when you stop pleasing them? Those who guilt you for having boundaries? Those who punish you for honoring your needs? They were never loving you. They were using you. And the sooner you recognize this, the sooner you can stop wasting your precious life force on people who see you as a resource rather than a human being. Rogers believed that every person, given the right conditions, would naturally grow toward their fullest potential. Like a plant reaching for the sun, like water finding its way to the sea, you have an innate wisdom that knows exactly who you're meant to be. But this wisdom has been buried under years of conditioning, fear, and the desperate need for approval. The question isn't whether you're capable of breaking free. You are. The question is whether you're willing to tolerate the discomfort of disappointing others in order to stop disappointing yourself. Imagine waking up tomorrow and not immediately thinking about what everyone else needs from you. Imagine moving through your day guided by your own inner compass rather than others' expectations. Imagine saying what you really think, feeling what you really feel, being who you really are. How does that feel? Terrifying? Liberating? Both? This is the edge Rogers was inviting his clients to explore. The edge between the familiar prison of people-pleasing and the unknown freedom of authenticity. It's scary because you've been taught that your survival depends on others' approval. But here's the truth. Your survival depends on your authenticity. Because a life lived for others' approval isn't really living. It's a slow death of the soul. When his clients finally started living authentically, when they stopped the exhausting performance of people-pleasing, something unexpected happened. They didn't lose everyone. Yes, some people left, the ones who were there for what they could get. But others stayed, and new people appeared. People who were attracted to authenticity, who valued truth, who could handle a real relationship with a real person. When you're constantly pleasing others, you're not just betraying yourself, you're also preventing genuine connection. Because connection requires two real people showing up authentically. When you're wearing a mask, when you're performing a role, there's nobody home for others to connect with. This is the tragedy of people-pleasing. In trying to ensure connection, you make real connection impossible. In trying to earn love, you become incapable of receiving it. Because even when someone says they love you, a voice inside whispers, they only love the performance, not the real me. Rogers had a revolutionary idea about therapy. He believed that the therapist's job wasn't to fix or change the client. It was to create conditions where the client could finally be themselves without judgment, without conditions, without performance. And in that space of radical acceptance, transformation naturally occurred. This is what you need to create for yourself. An inner space where you can exist without apology, without performance, without the exhausting effort of being good enough. Because you already are good enough. You were born good enough. The only question is whether you'll live knowing this truth or spend your life trying to prove something that needs no proof. Every time you say yes when you mean no, you're lying. Every time you smile when you're hurting, you're lying. Every time you pretend to be okay when you're falling apart, you're lying. And these lies aren't protecting anyone. They're creating a false reality where your needs don't matter, your feelings don't count, and your truth doesn't exist. Rogers understood that psychological health wasn't about being happy all the time. It wasn't about being liked by everyone. Psychological health was about congruence. It was about having your inner experience match your outer expression. It was about being the same person in every room, with every person, in every situation. The path from people-pleasing to authenticity requires something Rogers called organismic valuing. This means learning to trust your own inner experience as a valid guide for your life. Instead of constantly looking outside yourself for what's right, what's acceptable, what's lovable, you begin to look within. Your body knows when something feels wrong. Your gut knows when someone isn't safe. Your heart knows when you're betraying yourself. But you've been taught to ignore these signals, to override this wisdom, to trust others' opinions more than your own experience. Rogers believed that the actualizing tendency never goes away. It just gets blocked, distorted, redirected. So all that energy you're using to maintain your false self, to manage others' emotions, to perform for approval, that's your life force being channeled into self-destruction. Imagine redirecting that energy toward your own growth. Imagine using that incredible sensitivity to tune into your own needs. This isn't selfishness. This is the beginning of genuine self-love. Here's what Rogers knew. Insight isn't enough. Understanding why you please others doesn't automatically stop the behavior. What creates change is experience. The experience of being accepted while being authentic. The experience of setting a boundary and surviving. The experience of disappointing someone and discovering that you're still worthy of love. This is why the journey out of people-pleasing requires courage. Not the courage to face danger, but the courage to face disapproval. The courage to tolerate others' disappointment. The courage to exist without constantly earning your right to exist. Your people-pleasing isn't just hurting you, it's hurting everyone around you. When you don't show up authentically, you rob others of the opportunity to know you. When you don't express your needs, you prevent others from the joy of meeting them. When you don't share your truth, you deprive others of the growth that comes from engaging with different perspectives. Rogers noticed that authentic people created what he called a growth-promoting climate around them. Their genuineness gave others permission to be genuine. Their self-acceptance inspired others toward self-acceptance. Their congruence created a space where others could explore their own congruence. The moment you stop people-pleasing isn't the moment you become selfish. It's the moment you become real. And realness, Rogers understood, is the foundation of everything meaningful in human life. Real relationships, real growth, real contribution, real love. Breaking free from people-pleasing isn't a decision you make once. It's a choice you make moment by moment, interaction by interaction. Every conversation is an opportunity to practice authenticity. Every request is a chance to honor your truth. Every relationship is a laboratory for learning to be yourself. And you'll fail. You'll slip back into old patterns. You'll find yourself smiling when you don't mean it, saying yes when you mean no, abandoning yourself for someone else's comfort. This isn't failure. This is part of the process. Rogers called it the organismic valuing process, the gradual learning to trust your own experience over external authorities. The more authentically you live, the more you attract people who can love the real you. The more you honor your own needs, the more you attract people who respect boundaries. The more you speak your truth, the more you attract people who value honesty. People-pleasing doesn't just exhaust you, it attracts the wrong people into your life. When you stop the performance, these people naturally fall away. And while this can be lonely at first, it creates space for something real to emerge. Rogers had a term for what happens when you finally stop pleasing everyone: the fully functioning person. This isn't someone who has no problems. This is someone who trusts their own experience, accepts their feelings, takes responsibility for their choices, and remains open to growth. This is someone who has stopped performing life and started living it. The fully functioning person doesn't need everyone to like them, because they've learned to like themselves. They don't need constant approval, because they've developed internal validation. They don't need to please everyone because they understand that their worth isn't contingent on their usefulness to others. This is what's waiting for you on the other side of people-pleasing. Not a life without care for others, but a life where caring comes from fullness rather than emptiness. Not a life without giving, but a life where giving is a choice rather than a compulsion. Not a life without connection, but a life where connection is real rather than performed. Rogers believed that every person has within them the resources for growth, healing, and transformation. You don't need to be fixed because you're not broken. You don't need to be saved because you're not lost. You need to remember who you were before the world taught you that being yourself wasn't enough. The journey back to that freedom isn't about becoming someone new. It's about unbecoming everything you're not. It's about peeling away the layers of performance, expectation, and fear to reveal what's always been there: your authentic self. People-pleasing often starts as a survival strategy in childhood. Maybe you had a volatile parent, and being good kept you safe. Maybe love was scarce, and being helpful earned you scraps of affection. This wasn't a choice you made. This was an adaptation to an environment where being yourself wasn't safe. But you're not in that environment anymore. The danger you're protecting yourself from doesn't exist in the present. Rogers understood that healing happens not by analyzing the past, but by experiencing something different in the present. Every time you express a need and the world doesn't end, you're healing. Every time you set a boundary and relationships survive, you're healing. Every time you disappoint someone and realize you're still worthy of love, you're healing. The most profound thing Rogers taught was that the therapeutic relationship itself was the therapy. It wasn't the techniques or interventions. It was the experience of being truly seen, heard, and accepted by another human being. This is what you need to offer yourself: a relationship with yourself characterized by understanding rather than judgment, acceptance rather than criticism, compassion rather than contempt. When you become this kind of presence for yourself, something miraculous happens. You stop needing others to validate your existence. You stop seeking permission to feel what you feel. You stop apologizing for taking up space in the world. You begin to inhabit your life fully, unapologetically, authentically. When you stop trying to be everything to everyone, you become something precious to the right people. When you stop diluting yourself to be palatable, you become nourishment for those who are hungry for truth. When you stop performing love, you become capable of the real thing. The journey from people-pleasing to authenticity is the journey from survival to living. It's the journey from performing to being. It's the journey from exhaustion to energy. It's the journey from emptiness to fullness. It's the journey home to yourself. Rogers spent his life showing people that they were acceptable exactly as they were, not as they should be, not as others wanted them to be, but as they actually were in that moment. This radical acceptance created the conditions for natural growth and transformation. This is the gift you need to give yourself. You are acceptable in your imperfection. You are lovable in your incompleteness. You are worthy in your struggle. You don't need to earn your place in this world through perpetual self-sacrifice. Your existence is your credential. Your being is your qualification. Your authenticity is your gift to the world. The voices that tell you otherwise are lying. They're the echoes of conditioning that taught you that love was a transaction, worth was earned, and belonging required betrayal of self. These voices have been with you so long they feel like truth, but they're not. They're just familiar lies. Rogers knew that the moment a person truly felt accepted, something shifted. The defenses dropped. The mask fell. The performance ended. And what emerged wasn't perfect, but it was real. And real, Rogers understood, is always more beautiful than perfect. This is your invitation, not to become perfect, but to become real. Not to please everyone, but to honor yourself. Not to earn love, but to embody it. Not to perform life, but to live it. The path forward isn't easy, but it's simple. Start small. Say no to something today. Express a preference. Share a feeling. Set a tiny boundary. Don't wait until you feel ready. You'll never feel ready. The courage comes after the action, not before. And when the guilt comes, because it will, remember, the guilt isn't a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're breaking a pattern. When the anxiety rises, because it will, remember, the anxiety isn't danger. It's your system adjusting to a new way of being. When the fear whispers that everyone will leave, remember, anyone who leaves because you stopped pleasing them was never really there for you anyway. Rogers believed in the inherent wisdom of every person. He believed that given the right conditions, every individual would naturally move toward health, growth, and authenticity. You have this wisdom within you. It's been there all along, waiting patiently beneath the layers of conditioning, ready to guide you home to yourself. The question isn't whether you can stop pleasing everyone and finally live free. You can. The question is whether you're willing to choose your own life over the exhausting performance you've been giving, whether you're ready to trade the false safety of approval for the real safety of self-acceptance, whether you're brave enough to disappoint others in order to stop betraying yourself. This is your life. Your one precious, unrepeatable life. How much longer will you spend it in service to others' comfort at the expense of your truth? How much longer will you wear masks that are suffocating your soul? How much longer will you postpone your own authenticity for the illusion of acceptance? The moment you stop pleasing everyone is the moment your real life begins. Not a perfect life, but a real one. Not a life without struggle, but a life where the struggle has meaning. Not a life where you're loved by everyone, but a life where you're truly loved by the right people, including yourself. This is what Carl Rogers was trying to tell us, that behind all our defenses, beneath all our performances, beyond all our fears, there exists a self that is inherently valuable, inherently wise, inherently worthy. This self doesn't need to be created, it needs to be uncovered. It doesn't need to be earned. It needs to be claimed. It doesn't need to be perfected. It needs to be expressed. Your authentic self is waiting. It's always been waiting. Waiting for you to stop the exhausting performance. Waiting for you to drop the heavy mask. Waiting for you to come home. The door is open. The light is on. And for the first time in your life, you don't need anyone's permission to walk through. This is your moment. This is your choice. This is your life. Stop pleasing everyone. Start living free. Not tomorrow. Not when you're ready. Not when it's safe. now. Because the greatest tragedy isn't that others might reject your authentic self. The greatest tragedy is that you already have. Rogers showed us that the person we're meant to be isn't some future version we need to achieve. It's who we already are beneath the conditioning. You don't need to become someone else. You need to stop being everyone else and finally, courageously, unapologetically, be yourself. The world doesn't need another people pleaser. It needs you, the real you. The one who's been waiting all this time to finally be free.